Good evening. My name is Cherry Peters. We've already established that. And I serve as the moderator of the Presbytery. Welcome to the special meeting in the Presbytery of the James, called to receive the report of the Strategic Plan, Staffing Structure, and Financial Review Task Force, and to act on their recommendations. Have some general housekeeping stuff. Bathrooms are located out this door and to the right. Volunteers out there can help you get where you need to go. If you have any questions, the First Church staff and our other volunteers will be able to assist you. Please note that we're recording today's meeting. I want to recognize Steve Hicks over there, who has volunteered to serve as parliamentarian today at the stated clerk's request. Thank you for your assistance, Steve. I also want to acknowledge Josh Andrzejewski, our vice moderator over there, who will be acting as a sort of sergeant at arms. He doesn't like me to say that, but that's how I'm thinking of it. Because we anticipate considerable discussion on the matter at hand, we will be doing our best to enforce a 3-minute time limit on each speaker at the microphone or on Zoom. Josh is going to be timing our speakers. If you missed Reverend Jez Cook's training and have a question, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. Concerning the participation in the meeting, Jess just went over that, but I do want to get to the alternating. We will be attempting to alternate. So folks on Zoom, we're going to have to ask you whether you intend to speak because you're in one long queue. To get people in the right order, we'll be asking people on Zoom whether they intend to speak for or against if we have a debatable motion on the floor. For folks here at First Church who wish to be heard, come to the mic. If needed, we can bring a microphone to a participant with voice if that's necessary. Please also state your name, whether you are a ruling teaching elder, and your ministry context. I'm a ruling elder here from so forth. And then proceed. Please always address your remarks to the moderator, not directly to the body. I want to thank the people who submitted motions in writing prior to this meeting. We are really grateful for that because it reduces the amount of data entry that has to go on to put motions up on the poll on Zoom and for display on the screen. However, please be aware that even if you submitted a written motion in advance, you must come to the microphone and move your issue. If you have a motion that has not been submitted in writing, there are forms up here at the stated clerk's desk. He has a pile of them. Please fill out the motion form and bring it to the stated clerk prior to coming to a microphone. Mr. Stated Clerk, would you like to go over the rules for the Presbytery meeting?
Thank you, moderator. Most of the rules have already been gone over. They're on before you on page 4 of your packet. The one that hasn't been discussed so far is that the minutes of the meeting will be read by 4 people that I will choose from 2 different regions who are known to have attended this meeting. And I will report on the minutes at our next Presbytery meeting. We talked about the forms for the motions. Debate on all debatable motions will be limited to 3 minutes, 1 time per person. And the vote count is going to be tallied by the Zoom administrator and myself to count both the floor votes and the Zoom votes and the phone votes. Are there any questions about the rules of the meeting? Thank you.
Mr. Stated Clerk, do we have a quorum this evening? We have a quorum. Thank you. Excuse me, I'm a little crowded up here. I declare we have a quorum and call the special meeting of the Presbytery of the James to order. Mr. Stated Clerk, would you please open us with prayer?
Before we begin, I would like you all to put everything down just for a minute. Unless you're holding a small child, would you please just put everything down and have your hands free? Now I'd like you all to take a deep breath. Take another one. This has been a busy time. We all have a lot on our minds. Let it go. Now, let us turn our attention to the Lord. I'm going to start by reading from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 to 6. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Let us pray. God of grace, we come before you today, acknowledging your presence among us. We ask that you send the Holy Spirit to fill this room and bless our time together. May your Spirit guide our thoughts, our words, and our actions so that everything we do brings glory to your name. And now, let all of God's children say, Amen.
Thank you, Barry. It is important for us to recognize that we are meeting today on the traditional land of the Powhatan people, an extinct Native American tribe. We acknowledge our debt to the Powhatan people for stewarding this land through the generations. Furthermore, we pay our respects to the Mattaponi, Upper Mattaponi, Pamunkey, Chickahominy, Rappahannock, Monacan, and Patawomack, who continue to reside in and care for their ancestral lands within the bounds of our presbytery. We are grateful to be their neighbors. I now call on Janet James, moderator of the Mission Council, for the adoption of the agenda. Janet.
Good evening, moderator. The agenda can be found on page 1 of your packet. This comes from the committee, so there's no second required. Therefore, the agenda's on the floor.
Thank you. I understand we have a motion to amend the agenda from the task force. Mike Watson will speak. You want to come up here? Yeah, you can speak
it's a
from there for
motion,
this.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's
a
fine.
motion. You need to be there.
Thank you, moderator. Mike Watson, Fairfield Presbyterian Church. Our motion, the Strategic Plan, Staffing Structure, and Funding Review Task Force moves that its report and recommendations be presented tonight as a first reading for information and clarification on July 30th. Then the task force subsequently will incorporate changes to the report as suggested by the Presbytery, and a final report be presented as a second reading at the next available Presbytery meeting for debate and adoption. I can speak further to that.
We need a second. Pardon me? Forgive me, we don't need it. Comes from a committee. We do not need a second. We have an amendment to the agenda on the floor. Is there anyone who wishes to speak for or against that motion?
Chair, may I speak to it first?
Yes, of course. Please do.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. When our team began its work, we were instructed to prepare a report to present for approval by June 2024. However, after sharing our report, it became clear that giving more time for this report to breathe, be discussed, and collect more input before coming back for final approval would be in the best interests of our presbytery. It also reflects a common practice that this presbytery has done of offering first and second readings. If this amendment is approved, instead of seeking action on our recommendations this evening, our team will collect feedback from this meeting, discuss its impact on the report, and return at a second reading, a final reading for debate and option of that report. We'll work with the Mission Council to ensure this meeting happens as soon as possible, given the urgency of matters at play. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else care to speak? I don't see any hands raised on Zoom. I have somebody coming to the floor. Please remember to identify yourself, your role, and so forth.
Yes, good evening. My name is Mark Hedberg. I'm a ruling elder from River Road Presbyterian Church, and I'm here to speak in opposition to the motion. It seems to me that the suggestion to delay this vote is untenable. Why the task force chose to go directly to a nuclear option and blow up the current staffing model was a conversation for later in the meeting. But there can be no doubt that the task force report has caused much turmoil and angst. If you thought there were problems before, how do you think the presbytery will operate if voting is delayed and we remain under this cloud for another month or two, or however long it is? As for this body, I understand that there are over 180 people participating live and online tonight. These people spent time preparing for the meeting and rearrange their schedules to be here. Don't send them home with nothing but an invitation to another meeting. In politics, there's often only one reason to request a delay to a vote. You think you're going to lose. I can't help but think that may be at play here as well. But whether it is or not, in the real world, it seems to me that delay helps no one. I would urge that we attend to the business for which this meeting was called and vote on the task force's recommendations tonight.
Thank you. I have a hand that popped up on Zoom. If that's all right, I'd like to recognize Patrick Lane.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Patrick Lane, minister member at Mitchell's Presbyterian Church. I'm speaking in favor of the motion. We were limited in the amount of time that we were able to review these recommendations from the task force. And with the amount of logistical concerns, the amount of financial concerns, simply put, the amount of concerns that it seems that the body has, I think voting on this tonight is irresponsible at the very least. So I would vote in favor of this being a listening session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I saw somebody who started to stand and wanted to speak. We have somebody coming to the floor.
I'm Jocelyn Shipman, ruling elder, Bon Air Presbyterian Church. At this time, I object and I oppose the motion that was just presented. There are some questions that I would like to have answered by the task force. One of the to be considered, were there any performance evaluations during these times of the Presbyterians? I wanted to ask about the survey that they used. Okay, that survey provided 3 ambiguous questions to answer. The number of people, I'm concerned with the number of people who filled out that particular survey was, according to some numbers, it looked like it may be 175 people. Is that critical mass? These are questions.
I know they're questions, but can we hold them? We're going to have a question period. Right now, we're discussing the merits of the motion to amend the agenda.
All right, in that case, I feel there's no need to prolong what we're doing. Okay,
Okay,
sorry, I'll come back.
thank you, Ms. Shipman. I don't have another hand on Zoom, so come on forward.
Reverend Dr. Rebecca Tucker Motley, teaching elder from Bon Air. Just a point of clarification, I have submitted a substitute motion to the original motion, so I'm asking how that falls into play here.
We received that motion and a number of others, and we'll take them as people come forward and propose them. We really just had them in advance for data entry purposes. They aren't on the floor because they were received by the stated clerk. Is that clear? That we got them in advance. So you submitted a substitute motion. Is it a substitute motion to the motion that we have on the floor now?
So it's the substitute motion for the original motion that was sent out with the packet. And so now that we're changing the original motion, I would like to know how my substitute motion now falls into play.
You would make a decision, and I'm going to turn that over to the parliamentarian. Steve?
I'm sorry, am I asking a really elementary question? Okay.
No, let's get this right.
The motion before the assembly currently. Pardon? Is that better? Okay. The question before the assembly currently is to amend the bylaw, not the
Amend
bylaws,
the-
the agenda.
Right.
If that is the case, then this will become a question, comments, concerns format. There will be no other motions that would be presented. So any motions that the stated clerk has received will have to be remade once the final report goes out prior to that meeting, should this motion be adopted.
In that case, I would like to speak against, simply because there are a lot of people who have put a lot of time and energy and effort over the past week and a half, 2 weeks, really discerning not only the motion that was presented, but substitute motions and other amendments. And I would just want to echo my sibling who spoke earlier saying that what's the benefit of prolonging this very sensitive issue?
Thank you very much. And I still don't have anyone on Zoom, so we'll take another comment from the floor.
Moderator Tom Coy, teaching elder at Campbell Memorial Church and Milden Presbyterian Church. I'm a member of the task force, and I speak in favor of this motion because I know there's a lot of questions out there and a lot of energy. It has taken the task force 7 months to get to this point, and we're going to solve everything in one evening. There's a lot of things that people have to ponder and think about and think through. And perhaps some of those motions that are pending may well be actually answered in the discussion we have, because it will be a wide open discussion that we'll have tonight of questions, answers, clarifications, suggestions. It'll all be out there. And maybe some folks will find that their concerns are actually taken care of. But I speak in favor of the motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Coy. I see no one else looking to come to the floor. So we will have a count. We are voting on the amendment to the proposed agenda from the Mission Council, and the amendment is to defer voting on the recommendations in the report to a later date. We do have a date for that. Thanks again to First Presbyterian Church. We can meet back here on September 24th, so we know when it's coming back to us. And all that'll be properly called and announced and stuff distributed. But at this point, I want to start a voting process. And here we go, counting hands, okay? First of all, there's the motion to amend. And those of you on Zoom should see a poll, although I do not. I do now. All right, so the Zoom folks have a poll. They will answer yes. They do want to approve the amendment, or no, they do not, or they're not eligible to vote. Would everyone in this room who is eligible to vote and is in favor of the amendment, raise your hand? We have tellers. We have tellers. Those of you on Zoom, bear with us while we count the hands in the room. All right, you can put your hands down. Thank you very much for your patience. All right. Folks on Zoom, just hold your seats. We're going to vote now. Those who wish to vote against, are we ready to count again? Those who are ready to vote against the amendment to the agenda, please raise your hand. Okay, you can put your hands down. Thank you. Do we have anyone on the phone? Forgive me, I forgot to ask for their votes. Please bear with me. If you're on the phone and you wish to vote in favor of the amendment, please press *9 now. Did you see any hands? I didn't either. All right, if you wish to vote against the amendment to the agenda, please raise your hand now by pressing *9. I see a hand. All right, I apologize to the folks on the phone for having been careless about that. All right, the amendment to the agenda passes with 110 votes for and 55 votes against. We now have an amended agenda on the floor that we need to approve or reject. Are we ready over there, guys? Hands have been put down and everything? All right. If you're on Zoom, you should see a poll soon about hearing the, about approving the agenda as amended. If you're in the room and wish to approve the agenda as amended, please raise your hand. Yeah, keep your hands up until you see the tellers have finished voting, counting, I'm sorry. Because they are double counting to make sure. Okay, looks to me like in the room you can put your hands down. And I see no votes on Zoom. And yes, anyone on Zoom that wishes to vote in favor of the amended agenda, please vote. Press *9 now. There's one. So we had one phone vote. All right. Those of you on Zoom, hang on. Those in the room who wish to vote against the amended agenda, please raise your hand now. Those of you on the phone who wish to vote against the amended agenda, please press *9 now. All right. The motion to approve the agenda was, I'm sorry, 144 votes in favor and 25 votes against. The agenda is approved as amended. At this point, I skipped to page 15 in my script. You will just bear with me. My script, depending on things that happen this evening, this thing is like a pick-a-path book. If you remember those design your own adventure stories. Okay, it is time for the task force to give us a report on their report. We will now proceed to that report. They'll be reporting in sections. As each section is finished, we will take questions and requests for clarification as appropriate. Those in the room, please come forward to the left-hand position to speak in favor. I'm sorry, we're not debating. Come to the left-hand podium, period. We're one long line. These are questions and concerns and comments. Remember, as welcome as they are, guests do not have voice in the room. Remember to address your questions to me and I will ask the task force to respond. I now call on Mike Watson, Jen Rowe, and Tom Coy to present the first reading of their report. Gentlemen and lady, I'm sorry.
Thank you, moderator.
Just that.
Oh, thank you. Okay,
Close as you can get.
thank you. Can you hear me? All right. Good evening. My name is Jen Rowe. I am a ruling elder from Fredericksburg. I have a bit of a history with the strategic plan as I served as the moderator for the strategic planning team. I would like to give you a very brief timeline on how we got here tonight. The development of the current strategic plan began in October of 2017, when ministers and commissioners at that stated meeting heard the report from a Vision 2020 team. The commissioners and the ministers referred that report back to Presbytery. At that same meeting, Presbytery ministers and commissioners voted to form a new group whose purpose would be to articulate a mission and a vision for the Presbytery of the James, propose a structure for the implementation of the vision and the mission, and recommend a financial plan for implementation of the vision and mission. The strategic planning team arising from that action began meeting in January 2019. The team's report was presented for review at a called Presbyterian meeting on November 21st, 2020. Each of the team's 4 recommendations were approved at that February stated meeting.
Thank you, Jen. Again, Mike Watson, minister member at Fairfield. So on November 16th, 2023, ministers and commissioners at the Presbytery of the James stated meeting voted to form a strategic plan, staffing structure, and funding review task force. And we were given a 6-month timeline to accomplish these 3 main goals, which function as the structure of our report. The first is to study the current strategic plan and its implementation and impact on the life of this presbytery and make recommendations on how it will be adapted in light of current realities. Number 2, to study present and future sources of funding that would consider but not be limited to sustainability, per capita, stewardship, and other sources. 3, to recommend authorized uses of the Church and Ministries Development Fund and Genesis and Generation Fund and any additional POJ reserve funds, and in consultation with the trustees, recommend a financially sustainable annual draw off POJ reserve funds to support the annual presbytery budget. So over 6, coming up on 7 months now, our team has had many difficult conversations as we've discerned these tasks before us. Our recommendations represent changes that we believe will help us live more effectively into our mission to support leaders, congregations, and ministries and growing followers of Jesus Christ who joyfully live out God's mission in the world. The findings and recommendations were submitted 2 weeks ago to the Presbytery. Our team appreciates the flexibility of all of you and being here to discuss this tonight. So as we've stated up front, our intention for how to do this is to spend time collecting input from as many of you as possible, to continue listening for how the Spirit is guiding us, and then we'll bring this report in a more finalized form from us to that later meeting for action on our recommendations. So we want to start this evening with the findings of the first section in our report, which were the observations and things that we found that lead to the review of the strategic plan itself. So we're not going to the recommendations yet. This is just the findings section, which everyone should have had access to and still have access to. And we'll do our best to respond to questions, and other task force members may come up as needed. And we'll use this time to listen to one another. So, Ms. Moderator, I'd turn the floor over to conversation on the findings in the section 1 of our report.
I apologize. It turns out we have, thank you. We have corresponding members present that have not been seated. I did not recognize that we had any, and so I didn't take the step of seating our corresponding members so that they would have voice. May I ask corresponding members to come forward and speak and introduce themselves? Well, there's one, I guess.
Good evening. Renita Page, Minister in Full Communion, serving through the formula of agreement. Thank you.
Is that all? All right, then. I'll entertain a motion to seat our corresponding member. Thank you. Second? Thank you. Any objection? Hearing none, it is approved by acclamation. Thank you. And sorry to leave you out at the beginning, Ms. Page. All right. We are now back on the task force report that I took us off of, and I apologize for that. We are ready to take questions and comments from the field. So please come to the stage, either come to the speaker here in the room or raise your hand on Zoom to be recognized. Is that okay? Hmm?
It's regarding findings, page 8.
Oh, and we're on findings, page 8. On the report on findings, specifically on findings on page 8.
Okay, I think it's my page B. Under current staffing model findings and recommendations, that's where we are, correct? Okay, again, I'm Jocelyn Shipman, ruling elder at Bonnier Presbyterian Church.
Thank you, ma'am.
Presbyterian Church. There were some questions that I had that I would like to have addressed. One, again, I just left my pad. But one of the questions I had was during this period, have there been any performance evaluations to date? That's one.
Perhaps it would be, forgive me, perhaps it would be best to take them one at a time. Would that be all right with you? If you ask your question, give them a chance to respond.
Not a
and-
problem.
Is that all right?
That's fine.
Okay, good. And by evaluations, you're talking about
Performance
performance evaluations. Have there been any performance evaluations?
Yeah, we believe that's a personnel committee conversation. That was not in our field of work, performance evaluations.
So you don't know one way or the other. So they don't know one way or the other.
Could that information be, can that information be considered by the findings of the task force?
Reverend Jess is the chairman of personnel. Do you want to comment on that?
We have begun a process of evaluation. Last year, yes, there was an evaluation process done with the Personnel Committee. And part of that process, as we discussed in the hiring process, when I served as co-chair of the hiring committee as well, was part of that would be cultivating what that evaluation process looked like. But there was a lengthy process that we went through with the Personnel Committee, both in terms of conversation with the staff and cultivating a new evaluation process as well. So
Okay.
yes.
Let me try again. Have the presbyteries, have they undergone a performance evaluation at this
Yes.
time? Okay. I wanted to know that. And then I wanted to ask about the survey that was done.
Yes, ma'am.
The survey that was done was on through the current, correct?
Yes.
It was advertised in the current, and according to some numbers that I gathered, it was about 175 people who answered.
Does that sound right? Not that many?
It wasn't 175 people?
I'm the secretary of the task force, so I kind of kept numbers. We had about 30 to 35 responses in all.
All right, with 30 to 35 responses in all, and the number of people in the POJ at this time being roughly 1,100 to 1,300, would that, 1,000, I'm sorry, 1,000, would that be considered critical mass? Would that be enough information or input on the survey to formulate some of the findings?
If we were basing our entire report on that survey sample, no, that would have been insufficient. But we had multiple inputs into our research, this being one of them, but we had interviews and other kinds of inputs from folks.
Okay, all
I
right.
know there were listening sessions at a recent stated meeting at the Kirk. And there have been others.
Okay, I understand that there was a lack of clear action plan and metrics for implementing the strategic plan. How did that play a role in your decision formulating your findings?
That was a big impact as we looked back on our time as a strategic planning team, realizing that we had not taken that step of making more exact ways of measurable outcomes. That was definitely part of our discussion as to why we've recommended what we've recommended.
Okay.
Would you like?
Yeah. Just to be really clear, when Jen said we as the POJ had never set any metrics or any kind of rigid review mechanism in place. That's why one of our recommendations is that council establish that kind of mechanism beginning now and forever until Jesus comes.
Okay, so I wanted to address the decrease in engagement of POJ presbyterians and meetings and councils. How did the finding come about? Explain that, would you please?
Are we still in the same? I don't have.
Okay, you're
Okay.
still,
No,
okay,
no,
if we're
I was-
still working under the model findings and recommendations, are we going down to the recommended new staffing model yet?
Yes, I think I know what you're talking about. Yes, that finding. I think that was just general response again from the in-person Presbyterian meeting, the online forums, and other narratives we've heard, and just knowing several of our teams have been under filled with nominations vacancies. And just I think that was just a general observation of many areas needing engagement of people. And just hearing, this is a refrain we've heard often of just needing people to be more engaged and as a.
Would that be a
observation.
responsibility of the presbyterians? Would that fall on the presbyterians? That's just.
Yes, yeah.
How is that, how would that be, how would that fall? God bless America. Let me bring up a couple other things. Are we discussing the current staffing model findings and recommendations?
Yes.
Okay,
The recommendations, yeah, sorry.
it is stated that there's a lack of intentional structured onboarding and orientation for the new presbyterians by the mission council and personnel committee that created confusion and about how to prioritize responsibilities. That is not a fault of the presbyterians, the people who were asked to come in for this.
Yes. Yes, we agree with that. Yes, we think that was on us. And through all this, we realized we all have, all these findings, we hope to present a holistic picture here, that we all had a part to play in the picture that we discovered. And part of that, yes, was us not giving initially those clear enough expectations, leading to some of that confusion or structure to begin with. So that was, I think, how we'd speak to that.
Okay, can I just ask a question? Yeah.
All right.
Can I just have 30 seconds?
We've got people lined up behind you. Can I ask you to get in line again?
Not a problem.
That to you, but. Pardon me? Accurate. until, is that until once period?
You can ask if there's no objection.
Well, does anyone have any Ms. Shipman, wait a minute, please.
Yes, I just wanted to, okay, I'll
No,
stay,
no,
please.
Stay. Is there any objection to Ms. Shipman having 30 seconds more? Hearing none, proceed. I'm
All
sorry.
right. I would like to bring up, there was a lack of communication, information sharing across councils, lack of clarity regarding information, the things that the Mission Council have presented, I'm sorry, the task force have presented aren't issues that are the responsibility or placed upon the presbyteros, and you are asking people to uproot and say, I'm sorry, we can't function this way, and you leave without considering everything.
Thank you, Ms. Shipman.
Online.
Yes, there's a line and you're at the head of it. No, I don't see any hands on Zoom. Thank you for asking. I appreciate that. I'm terrified I'm going to miss something.
Again, Reverend Dr. Rebecca Tucker Motley, teaching elder from Bon Air Presbyterian Church. I am probably echoing a lot of what my sibling just said. But again, I just want to know the thought process, because when I read through this, so many of the concerns come from the mission council / people side. And yet it seems, in my understanding of the motion, that the people who are being punished, losing their livelihoods, losing their careers, are two people who very much did not have, were not key players in the miscommunication, misappropriation. So I just want to speak, or I would love to hear you speak to your thought process on how these findings that have been presented equal to people losing their livelihoods.
Thank you for sharing that. And again, I think we recognize the heaviness of this and the difficulty of it. We saw our goal as evaluating the plan, strategic plan, how it was structured, how it's working. And so I think our recommendations were in light of that plan, thinking the plan we discovered was mostly a staffing model. And that's, again, with that lack of clear boundaries beyond that, was just something we kept coming back to. And so I think from our perspective of evaluating a plan, our discovery was the plan is not working as a staffing model as structured. And so we felt instead of kind of making those adjustments on the way, because of the holistic nature of all of us being at play and the lack of clear boundaries, we just felt the most effective way to adjust it would be to change the staffing model. And the way we recommended it was essentially how we landed on that.
If I may just make a recommendation to the staff task force, it's been 1 year. It has been 1 year. None of us come into a job and make effective change in 1 year. Please keep that in mind.
Woohoo. Amen. Madam Moderator. It's been 2, yes, but it's.
Hang on one second,
okay.
because I now do have a hand online.
Oh,
I
okay, great,
apologize.
no problem.
Joseph Tabor, your hand is up.
Thank you, moderator. Joseph Tabor, minister member currently serving at Culpeper Presbyterian Church. So as I read this, I had also highlighted that section on decrease in engagement of POJ presbyters in meeting and councils. And as I heard the conversation about that, it seemed like we're using presbyter in 2 different ways. Would it be accurate to say that in that bullet point, you're talking about presbyters as teaching and ruling elders who participate in presbytery, not necessarily a lack of the staff presbyters to do their jobs in working with the councils? Would you say that we're talking about presbyters at large and not these specific presbyters in that bullet point?
Yeah, that's a very helpful clarification. We've noted that there's just been a decrease of participation all across the presbytery.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tabor.
Madam Moderator, Reverend Kelly Ann Rail, serving River Road, and also co-moderator of the Commission on Ministry. First of all, I'd like to ask personnel if the performance evaluations were shared with the Mission Council or any sort of that formed this report. The task force, that's what I meant.
No, we did not
I'm sorry.
communicate. We did not communicate with the task force. There are 2 members of personnel who served on the task force, but to my knowledge, that information was not shared with the
So,
task force.
so our task force had no information about the performance of our presbyters in making this report. I'm just clarifying.
Correct.
I think
To my knowledge, I mean,
literally
we
true.
were not
They had
asked.
no information about what was said on their performance reviews.
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
That doesn't mean they had no information from anybody. If I may jump in, if that makes, I'm not trying to.
No, I'm
split
just
hairs.
clarifying system and structure here and appropriateness
Of course.
when evaluating 2 people who are working very, very hard. And I know that firsthand. So I want to speak to the strategic task force and thank you for all your time and effort and energy. None of this work that we do in the presbytery is easy or, doesn't come with difficulty. And we know that because I've been serving now for almost 2 years on the commission, and I know how difficult some things can be, but it's rewarding. We all find it rewarding. That's why we're here today. And so I affirm what we are doing in this moment, but I also affirm my 2 colleagues that have to wait another month now in waiting and do this all again. And I ache for them in that way. But I also understand the process and why we do what we do. And I would like to speak to this. When you work with these folks and they did not have a foundation that they walked into with this new model that was there for them to succeed, they are rebuilding by the moment and we are making strides. We are getting there, but it is going to take some time and it's going to take some patience on the part of the presbytery and more communication from each committee. The commission was not consulted on this at all, and we work very closely with both of them, if not especially one. And so we weren't considered on this at all and were debated and consulted. So I just want to affirm the work of us in community. And I really don't have a question. I just have inspiration to understanding that the model you put in place is it's got some merit and we need to strive to make it work. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't see another hand on Zoom, so come on forward.
Again, Reverend Dr. Renita Page, corresponding member, voice but no vote. I'd like to raise 2 issues that are of concern for me that the task force again might offer some clarification on. Number 1, what, if any, were the distinctions made between staffing model recommendations and specificity of personnel action? Those are 2 very fundamentally different activities to undertake. So that's the first question. And the second is, what sort of metrics are available to the body at large regarding where decisions and conversations fell within the task force on which directions should be taken? Did you vote? Was it a majority? How did you determine a majority? Because I think that is important. The discussions within the task force, those who were for or against within that body, certain actions, I think is important for us in terms of understanding the any sort of consensus, the level of consensus even within the task force itself. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll speak to the latter first. We, being a small committee, we never had the need to take individual votes. We generally operated on consensus with pretty much everything and giving every member the chance of the team to kind of chime in, offer objections. So we were very intentional about that, about being in step with each other throughout the whole process. We felt we worked together in that and were able to be in consensus through that. And back to the first point, again, we did our best to again, not just to see this as evaluating a staffing model and a plan. And we knew it was tied in with personnel, and we've tried to keep that boundary with personnel and how to do that dance with how it goes from here. And to speak briefly to an earlier point, I think related, two of our members were on personnel, two of our members are on mission council. So we know in our creation of this team, we had that representation from those other teams and how we consulted and had our conversations.
Just to
Especially on
add-
ministry,
okay.
yes.
As a final comment regarding your first response to what was my second concern, I think it is important, the level of ascent or descent to certain, to each of the areas is important for this body to have some sense of. I'm sure, well, let me say this, I will not presume that on every point, you reached a unanimous consensus. So I think it is important for us to have some sense of the level of ascent or descent on each of the points. Thank you.
If I can ask you to wait, we have somebody on Zoom. Patrick Lane, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Patrick Lane, teaching elder, Mitchell Presbyterian Church. I just wanted to ask the task force if they'd be willing to clarify and just be honest with the body if they believe they had enough time and resources to adequately do the task of giving the presbytery this recommendation on both the personnel and the funding side. So if the task force would just like to speak to that and share that with the body of were you given the resources and the time?
Thank you.
Were we given the time? No. No. This has been 10 people, many of whom are serving congregations during times of Holy Week, Easter, and we gathered often. And as a member, along with Tom, on the strategic planning team, we were asked by this presbytery when they formed a task force to look at the strategic plan, which was a great shift to go from one presbyter to 3 presbyters. It wasn't to necessarily evaluate the 3 presbyters who came into those positions, and I served on the search committee and was deeply blessed to meet the 3 people who filled these positions. We were asked by the presbytery to do a task of reviewing the strategic plan staffing model. And you can imagine how hard that is to try and do that when personnel is involved and when things that happen with personnel are not for the task force or for the whole body to hear. We could have taken more time, but we did what we could in the time that the presbytery voted for us to have.
And we were thrifty. We didn't spend a dime.
Come on forward. I have one more come on. I have one person in the room and then I'll call on Robert Johnson.
Thank you. Kathleen Harris, ruling elder, First Presbyterian, Richmond. Thank you for what sounds like a lot of hard work in a short period of time and having to navigate the dance between a plan and personnel issues that are not within everyone's purview. It sounds like a lot of the questions that I'm hearing this evening are looking to the pragmatics of certainly this first part of the report, and as someone mentioned, upending some livelihood and job positions. I think a lot of the questions that are being asked, should that type of recommendation go forward, bring to mind whether Presbytery has consulted employment counsel and what implications there might be for that. And I apologize for asking something that sounds so, inelegant.
Respond as to whether the mission council has what used.
And I just
Please forgive
asked
me.
that as a question and a
I know, I was
consideration.
just going to ask Janet if that has happened because I'm not sure these folks would know. Janet, has anybody contacted employment lawyers to talk about the situation? Her response was, oh heavens, no. So, no. I have one on Zoom. Robert Johnson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I I just have a couple of observations about this first point. The first one being that if we go forth with this, what we're talking about here is losing 6 months of salary with no benefit for each of the two presbyters, which is already a huge loss of money. These are individuals who are currently in their positions. We've already been told.
Forgive me, Robert. I think you're talking about one of the recommendations and we're talking about the process. We'll get to the recommendations. Am I
My
right?
apologies.
No, my apologies for interrupting. We'll get back to you. Oh, the person in the aisle also. Arch?
Moderator is Arch Wallace at the Brandon Mill Church, but as a lawyer for many, many years, churches are exempt from the laws that we have normally to follow on hiring, firing, and so on. So churches are free to decide what they want, how they want. Sorry to bring that message because one of my questions that I would like to ask is, is there some way when you present the next step that you present it in a way that is compassionate, that does take into account the individuals, that does address in a better way the fact that we have some people here who are very special and they've done a hard, good job. And can you in some way address that so that we take that into account? That it seems to me as I first read this, and this is a comment, not a question, but my comment was, this is so not compassionate. This is just bang. And these people are so special. Thank you.
Yeah, we come forward. Thank you.
J.R. Marker, Fairfield Presbyterian. Question for the task force. Did you all look at if the current model was maintained, that eventually let me back up. Currently, the presbytery is having to pull significantly from funds in order to maintain current staffing. Did you all see any way if the current staffing were maintained, that eventually they would be able to fund themselves?
Well, we'll be hearing more about that in the second set of recommendations
Okay.
on the financial aspects of our charge.
Okay.
So if you can hold off till then, we'll have at it.
Okay. My second question is, everything we've discussed here has been approved by Presbytery, by this body. Did you, in your investigation, your interviews, research and everything, did you find any indications of deception, obfuscation, anything like that in the material presented to the Presbytery in making those decisions?
If you want to get granular, yes, we had instances where there was some obfuscation, such as the finding that it seemed to be the onboarding of the presbyters was very poorly done. They just didn't seem to have the kind of comprehensiveness and support that was needed. So yeah, that was one of our findings. Generally speaking, we found that folks are pretty clear. We interviewed all the staff, by the way, including the presbyters. We interviewed everybody, and they're pretty clear in their understandings and their thoughts. So we were able to hear that very clearly. No, we're dealing with a clear problem, and that's, you know, how do you find a solution to a very, well, we consider a fairly clear problem. Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you.
I've got nobody online, so come on forward.
Yeah, Mark Hedberg from River Road. I guess just observation, and since I understand the next step will be to flip the page and go to the recommendations. The anticipatory observation is, as several people have said before, virtually none of the findings on page 8 speak to specific failures of the staffing model. One less than half speak to significant failures of the presbytery. I would love to hear from the task force how you went from these findings and problems at the presbytery level to the conclusion that we needed to throw out the staffing model. And as a general comment, I know you want to hear feedback from us and get our questions. We're all here to hear from you. We're desperate for you to explain to us what you've done and how you've done it. So it would be extremely helpful, at least to me, if you would present what you've done and, you know, put some color around it, put some meat on the bones before you ask us for questions. We want to hear from you. Thank you.
Come forward, Dan. I don't have anybody on Zoom.
Dan Jordanger, ruling elder at Providence Church in Gum Spring. I was going to address the same point Mark just did, which is that the task force, I think, has done a great service for the presbytery in identifying what are systemic problems. There's a long list of terms in the report describing those problems. Outdated policies and procedures, lack of communication, lack of clarity regarding authority, lack of clear action plan and metrics, decrease in engagement, budget confusion, anxiety, need to rebuild trust, cooperation, comprehension, transparency, leadership, and relationships. And these are all quotes of the report. So you all have identified what are really systemic problems within our presbytery. As a member of Mission Council for the last 3 years, I take to heart and feel a great burden and responsibility for what you've identified as Mission Council's shortcomings. I appreciate hearing them from you. I truly do. I expected in reading those that you would have more for Mission Council to do, more for the Personnel Committee to do going forward. I know our juices are flowing in our heads about making Mission Council more effective. But given the systemic problems you've identified, even as you, Mike and Tom, you've addressed what the problem is, what the proposed solution is, the logical leap from systemic problems to changing the staffing model and terminating the presbyters is something I'm just not catching yet. And I hope that if not tonight, you will address that, because I think it is a logical fault of the report and the recommendations. Thank you.
Jess Cook, teaching elder at Westminster, interim at Westminster Presbyterian Richmond, and coordinating pastor at Every Table New Worshiping Community. I just have a question about how much you consulted with other mid-councils, other presbyteries. There are so many presbyteries who are going through so much transition right now, and I would love to know about input coming from other presbyteries that you had during your process of information gathering.
Thank you, Jess. We consulted with a few contacts we had, stated clerks and others, in terms of just, their systems. But, again, beyond those few, I can't speak to how many that may have been. Yeah, I mean, again, I just want to echo the, difficulty we had and the time frame we had to, address a lot of this with our recommendations.
Absolutely.
And Gordon's going to chime in here too.
Gordon Mapes, teaching elder Chester, just to add a little more, Jess. I spoke to 6 presbyteries.
Yeah.
In the Northeast and in the West,
Yeah.
dealing with various issues.
Yeah.
Principally focusing on budgetary, but I did speak about staffing.
Yeah.
So say 6 from me, and then there were others that we're checking on.
Yeah.
So to
Okay.
get a little hard number on there, but we did look at other presbyteries.
That's helpful. Yeah, that's helpful.
And we also consulted with Warren the Sane,
Mhm.
the stated clerk and presbyter of the Synod of the Mid-Atlantic, and
Yeah.
they had done some interesting work in getting their finances straight,
Mhm.
which is very attractive to us.
Yeah.
And also, he was able to give insights into different presbyteries in the Synod who are dealing with these issues and how they did them.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I recognize the enormity of the task that you all were given and how difficult it's been, just the whole process, and challenging for everyone. I also would love to know how much conversations about current trends in the church as a whole came up in the conversation. Like in the denomination, in the institution, just as we're talking about current trends, did those come up in your conversation?
I think we would really talking about our small churches. That was part of the strategic plan, was getting the presbyters out into the presbytery, meeting
Right.
with the smaller churches, how we can envision to bring new life or what ways to talk to those.
Absolutely.
And so talking about where we might be going and looking at this 3 presbyter model, not the people, the 3 presbyter model, and how it was playing out the way the strategic plan had envisioned it as far as getting out into the presbytery and meeting the needs of those small churches that really rose up when we were doing our strategic planning time, feeling disconnected,
Yeah.
as well as taking Richmond out of being a central location
Right.
and decentralizing all the meetings here and trying to move that out more into our large presbytery.
Thank you. I asked just because one of the things that keeps sort of striking me as I've spent a lot of, I mean, I know all of us have spent a lot of time looking at the data, and it's not just for the last few years, but the last 20, 30, 40, it's been a while. And it kind of dawned on me in the last few weeks that I have never seen a piece of data that says that the church is going back to what it's been in the past. Like I haven't ever seen it. And we keep saying, but if we do these things. And I think what strikes me about is this new model is that there are so many interesting ministries happening all over this presbytery. But we need to be connected and we need to know what's going on. And there are so many congregations going through so much transition right now. I know for sure the number of times that Leanne's name is said at Westminster Presbyterian Church in gratitude for her steadiness and her presence that she has been able to offer to the congregation as they've moved through this time of transition has been profound in ways that we hadn't been able to offer before. And I bring that up just because I think part of the bigger thing that I know I struggle with a lot of times is realizing that there's not going to be the same assurance going into the future that we've had in the past, that we have 10, 12 years of savings there. Like it's just not where we're going. And what strikes me with the findings in terms of turning down this model or deciding it doesn't work is that it does actually seem to be working. It takes time. And I recognize I appreciate Nan speaking about Mission Council as personnel. I can also fully own my role in all of that, in helping to clarify. When we were on the committee, that was part of what we said this was going to happen. But it just feels like going back to this model is something that's worked well for the church in the past, but not for where the church is going in the future. And I just would love to give this a little more time. So thank you.
We do not have anybody with a hand up on Zoom, so please come forward.
Reverend Lynn Clements, minister member, Westminster Church, Charlottesville. Grateful for all the work that the task force has presented to us today, especially with regard to our own actions and inactions as members of this presbytery. I do want to speak to an encouragement for the potential to take a slightly different perspective. And that is to look at, much as Jess has said, the new things that are working. New things take a long time to grow. And like a small plant that pushes from the dirt, we have to be patient. And yet it feels as if in this report, the acknowledgements of the gifts and the graces of the folks who are serving on staff were not acknowledged to the same degree that the faults and failures of the presbytery members and the system and the model were acknowledged. So an encouragement to step back and offer some of those things so that we might also see the places in which the growth was happening, and to recognize that as we look for what is in the future, we would see those things as evidence of hopeful possibility of what might be. And also want to speak in gratitude for Flo and for Leanne, for the ways in which they have faithfully served this presbytery and taken what had been a very difficult entry point and have made into their work a lot of important changes. And I'm grateful for that. And I wanted to say that.
Thank you. Still don't have anybody. Oh, I do have a hand up. Oh, well, Patrick, you've already spoken.
I would just, Madam Moderator, if I'm allowed, I would just like to request that we move on to the recommendations from the task force, as we are now under an hour left of the meeting.
Understand, I have two people waiting in line. Recommendation, Steve? No recommendation from the parliamentarian. Let the line exhaust, but thank you for that comment, Patrick. Rosalind.
Rosalind Banbury, teaching elder, currently retired. I'm actually on page 9 under the recommendations and this, but we're not there yet.
We're not there yet.
Well, it's a question about, I'm glad to wait. You want me to wait?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Moderator Steve Hicks, ruling elder at Mitchell's Presbyterian, also serving as parliamentarian. Without objection, since I do not have voice, but I would like to make a comment to the committee as the first stated clerk that came from the original strategic plan and the implementation thereof.
Let me just ask, does anybody have any objection to hearing a comment from Steve speaking as the first stated clerk? Hearing none, you have the floor.
Thank you. Allow me to encourage the task force to prepare and to the presbytery itself, because I do believe that when the original strategic plan was adopted, the presbytery did not follow through with its responsibility to make sure that everything was in place and the recommendations and the motions that were presented for a smooth transition. There were really no job descriptions in place, as mentioned in the report. Those need to be in place prior to the adoption of this final recommendation, should any changes in personnel be determined. But also that the duties be divvied up accordingly, because I know that Flo and Barbara and Leanne spent days, weeks trying to figure out who was going to do what part was the lead presbyters, what part was Leanne's, Barbara's, and then what fell on the stated clerk. And that was confusing for everybody. So we as a presbytery need to hold your feet to the fire, and maybe with help from Mission Council, but there has to be a full-blown recommendation covering all aspects in the final report.
Thank you. Seeing no further comments, Oop, I got one on. Yeah, Mr. Grayling, you have the floor. You're muted, sir. You're muted.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, also for that. Really a very basic, so I'm Cobus Grayling, serving as teaching elder at UVA Healthcare. A very basic question, really. I wonder if one can describe what the fear is concerning all of that is in the room. And I don't know if there's an answer for that, but just really being curious. Thank you. Thank you.
You guys want to take it?
He's just making an observation.
Okay. All right. I think at this point, we are ready to move on to your presentation on recommendations 1 through 5, right?
First off, thank you for all of your questions and comments. We truly take them all to heart. And we intended to do this for this purpose, to be able to listen to each other and take them seriously. So as seen in your report, there are 5 recommendations that came out of this from the task force, all before you. Believe everyone may have access to them. So we figured we would just leave it open for all of them. Folks can speak to any of them. We'll make sure we take notes on them as they come up. So about the recommendations, just questions, insight, input people have. We know there's some overlap with what's been said before, but we're now moving on to that section of our report.
Silly me, I thought I was going to sit down for a minute. So we're talking specifically about recommendations 1 through 5. I have no one wanting to speak on Zoom, so step forward.
Reverend Crystal Varner Parker, minister member at Providence Forge Church. I would love to know more about how we got to this recommendation of eliminating our 2 presbyter positions and moving to a executive presbyter and a full-time stated clerk. We are currently in great transition when it comes to staffing within the Presbytery of the James, and moving to a model of eliminating these 2 folks who have been working on gaining so much institutional knowledge and rectifying so much of the dysfunction that this report has highlighted. I'd love to understand how this is the best course of action to move forward. I have personally worked with both of them on more than one committee here in the Presbytery, and can say that they have a wealth of wisdom, a wealth of knowledge, and that there have been times where there are information gaps, and that information is what we need for the success of this presbytery, to ensure that the right people are in the right places, that we do not have people who have, for lack of a better word, abused folks within this presbytery back in positions where they can perpetuate the abuse that they have previously caused. So I would love to know more about how this is the best course of action when we have 2 presbyters who have been doing a phenomenal job to fix the communication barriers, to increase the engagement within the presbytery, and to fix a lot of the problems that you've identified. Thank you.
Somebody want to respond? Oh.
Good evening. I'm Shelley Barrick Parsons. I'm a member at large, serving in a nonprofit here in Richmond. When we had the conversations with other presbyteries, when we had the conversations with presbyters, when we looked at the struggles that were happening in the presbytery office, including hearing, and also I think it's just really uncomfortable because we did our best to not get into personnel matters, to not ask those questions. But it was clear that there, in the 3 stools, in the 3-legged stool structure, there wasn't someone where the buck stopped, for lack of a better word. And so that's why we did look back at an executive presbyter structure, because it makes it clear to compare it to a church model, that there is a head of staff that's working with the session. And I know we can argue what the book of order says, but that was part of what we saw in clarifying with the executive presbyter model. And second to that, given what we talked about communication, administrative gaps, the amount of work going into policies, procedure, and communication, it looked like in looking at models and roles that people can play, the stated clerk model, taking on a more full-time role and really beefing up that part of the process would be good. And to address the question about why can't jobs be revamped, I think it has been said about the systemic issues, and that our question was not for lack of skill and work and wisdom of the current ones, the difficulty of asking someone to take on a different job and return the system within a system that they're struggling. So that, I think, was part of our recommendation to start over in that respect. Thank you.
I'm going to let Robert Johnson from Zoom speak now. Robert, you have this. Reverend
Thank
Johnson.
you. My name is Robert Johnson. I'm teaching elder at New Hanover Presbyterian Church. First of all, I have many friends on this committee, and wanted to thank you for your work and the pressure that's been put on you. I too am puzzled, however, by the staffing recommendations, and there are three reasons for that. The first reason is that we're talking about, as I was beginning to say earlier, giving fairly, generous consideration in severance pay, which is entirely appropriate, and I agree. But when you're $800,000 down a year, every penny counts, and I'm not sure that's making the pennies count when we're already getting service. And the statement in your own report was, this really doesn't save us a lot of money, the new model that you have. I would rather make sure that whatever model we're going to come up with is one that we're going to keep. And I don't know that it would be very much in terms of a great recruiting tool to say, well, yeah, we're doing this now, but we might have to get rid of you too in a few years. Just depends on what we got coming up. I don't think this is the right way to do this. It doesn't seem to me to be thought out. And I very much want there to be a just outcome for everyone. And it's not that I incidentally object to your other plan. When this was voted in years ago, my thought had been we needed a full-time executive presbyter, and we needed certainly more time for a stated clerk than we were giving them. So it's not that I object to that. It's that I want to make sure that if we're going to do something, let's do something that's based on evidence, that's going to address the budget problems that we have in a more final way, which will probably include cuts as well as inerments in our budgetary in our intake. I just want there to be a better, something that seems to have been more inclusive.
You see the sign that went up that said you have 30 seconds. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Johnson. Are you done?
I am.
Okay, thank you very much.
Reverend Rebecca Motley at Ruling Elder at Bon Air. It's the third time I've been up here, so hopefully you all know me by now. For your consideration, Madam Moderator, I submitted a substitute motion, which I understand is out of order as a voting motion. However, I request that it be put on the screen so that I can speak to it, because I would like to give it as my gift to the task force purely for consideration, because it does speak to these 5 motions, if that's possible.
Just don't move it.
I'm not moving it. I'm not moving it.
Is there any objection to this? I think she
Okay. So as has been stated many times tonight, there seems to be clear systemic issues going on that perhaps we could agree that the presbyter model is part of the systemic issues. However, it is by far not the only systemic issue. And so for your consideration, G-3.0109B5, everybody get that? Of the Book of Order says that administrative commission may be entrusted to visit particular councils, congregations, or agencies reported to be effective with disorder. That's a big word, disorder. I am not stating that we are in a spot of disorder. However, I think it's clear tonight that there are true conversations that need to be had that an outside perspective would only help, that we would benefit from. So my substitute motion was going to be to request an administrative commission be formed by the Synod of the Mid-Atlantic within these bounds. I'll let you read that. But basically, my thought process comes from when Jesus tells us in Matthew that if you have an issue, take it to the sibling. And if that sibling won't listen, take it to someone else. I'm paraphrasing. If they still won't listen, take it to the whole church. Okay, we've been working on these issues. I've been a member of this presbytery since 2019, which I know compared to some of you is not very long. But since I've become a member of this presbytery pre-COVID, I have been witness to a lot of these systemic issues. I think it's time. I think it might be time to take it to the larger church and say, we need help. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help.
Come on forward, Reverend Banbury.
Rosalind Banbury, teaching elder, retired. I have mostly questions. First, thank you for your work and thank you for the amount of hours that you've put in. I appreciate that. These recommendations to me assume that the strategic plan cannot work. And I don't know if that is what you're basing some of the recommendations on.
Ross, you have to remember that as you read this report, the strategic plan's vision and mission are very much in play. We found
Right.
real support for that. It is the implementation of it that's under question at this point. And we feel, and obviously several of you have said, the case is not quite clear as to why we came to the conclusion we did, but just our conclusion is we need a reset. We don't think the three presbyter model is going to work. And we think there are other ways to make it work.
Thank you.
And those are also embedded in our recommendations.
Thank you. I just wanted to be clear about that one point. Thank you.
Thank you again, Reverend Kelly Ann Rail from River Road Presbyterian Church. Madam Moderator, my question is if in considering these 5 recommendations, was any discussion come in play about the administrative responsibilities at the presbytery level? And I'm speaking directly, quite frankly, to the ins and outs of the day-to-day work that needs to be done and how that has been sort of parlayed onto our presbyters. And now we're working towards getting it into committees. But we had a great administrator at the presbytery that did a lot of work, and we're feeling that and the structure again was not built up for them in order to sort of lose that especially without job descriptions. So I wonder, Madam Moderator, if I'm asking that to you all, if that was consideration, the administration piece of all of this, and how was that addressed?
Yeah, in terms of administration, like in the Presbytery office and all that, as we interviewed the staff, it became clear that we are understaffed.
Yes.
Even though we have 3 presbyters and well, Kelly is gone now, but she was our communications person, and Barbara and our treasurer, come on. Cindy, yeah. And that and that, yep.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was not directed.
There's another Presbyterian meeting going on back here. And that we lost a lot when
Franklin.
when Franklin, we tried to get him back, but again, I believe it's a budgetary question that stopped him from continuing his work. So now we keep 3 presbyters. We have to add in more support staff to make things happen, which again increases the indebtedness issue. And it became kind of like, can we really go in that direction? Are there other ways that the administrative questions can be addressed?
Okay.
And that this part of our,
Well, in consideration moving forward, considering what we've brought forth, that we have a model that we don't feel like has been fully, executed, if you will, and that it needs some foundation to it, but we are making progress. I would love the strategic task force to consider an administrative person that can handle, and I'll be very specific, the outdated policies. We're all trying as volunteers, but the outdated policies and the outdated manuals and that sort of thing, that is a priority, so that our presbyters, if the strategic task force so recommends in the future, can move on to doing what they were slated to do. So thank you.
I think this is a point of personal privilege. I'm going to ask you all to stay put where you are. I also have somebody on Zoom. I am concerned that it is now a little after 7 and we are scheduled to end at 7:30. And I wondered if the body would object if we extend the time of this meeting to 8 o'clock. Does anybody, so that we can at least cover more of this material if we possibly can? Is that something that people would be okay with? Hearing no objection? I know it's hot, but. All right. We now will have a meeting that will last till 8 o'clock. If you'll, what? No.
I think you're gonna have to ask somebody.
He's right. He just said to me, we need to ask someone to move the extension and second it and vote on it. Would somebody? I need a motion first. Somebody say move it. I see a motion. I've got a second. All right. We're giving the Zoom folks a chance to put something up. I'm sorry to keep you all standing in the aisle. I'm just concerned about the time. You ready? All right. Those of you on Zoom will see a poll. So we have to count. This requires a 2/3 vote, thanks to our parliamentarians, so we will have to do a count. We have a poll going on screen. If you are on the phone and you want to vote in favor of extending the meeting, please press *9 now. Those in the room who are in favor of extending the meeting, please raise your hand. Keep them up. Okay, I think you can put your hands down now. And it looks like we had 2 votes in favor on just 1 on the phone, right? That's right. Okay. Thank you. All those opposed to extending the meeting, please hold your hand up. And anyone on the phone who is opposed to extending the meeting, please raise your hand now by pressing *9. Okay, it looks like the tellers have finished. You can put your hands down. Josh just pointed out to me that they have adjusted the air conditioning to try to make it cooler in here. For those of you who would like to, the chapel is much cooler and you can still be watching the meeting from in there if you would like some respite and a chance to cool off. And the volunteers can help you find that. Oh, it is, the vote is 82 in favor of extending, 75 in opposed to extending. The motion fails. That's not 2/3. Pardon me? Ah. The motion fails. Well, the meeting will end at 7:30. All right. Okay. Reverend Tabor.
Thank you, moderator. Reverend Joseph Tabor, minister member at Culpeper Presbyterian Church. I want to echo what has been said by many of my colleagues. The task force is comprised of people who I respect and admire. And to get this done in 6 months is an incredible task, and y'all are to be lauded for it. And I hear you when you say there was a lot of pressure, especially in the historical review, going from 2017 to 2020 for the last one and going from January to July for this one. Well done, y'all. I think you have correctly identified many of the issues with the previous strategic plan. I think many of your solutions are right on the number. My comment, and this is not a question, my comment as y'all are looking at a second draft is I think God has provided us with two excellent leaders in the form of our two presbyters. And as we are discerning that we have different needs of our leadership, I would like to give the opportunity for our existing presbytery staff to say whether or not they feel like they can provide the necessary leadership that we need. Understanding that financially that might mean a pay cut or additional responsibilities, but it seems to me that God has provided these excellent people, and we have needs that perhaps they can provide, and to just let them go because this isn't the job description for which they were called. Well, they weren't called to a job description. They were called to a community of communities, an extended family of faith. And I would like to keep them around to the extent that they are willing to stay around. Thank you.
Thank you. Hang on one second. We're going to take a few more questions and comments on this one. We need to transition on to some more material, but please come forward.
Jim Elliott, ruling elder, Westminster Presbyterian Church. I'm just trying to get from point A to point B here. Point A being the recommendations, the 5 recommendations, and point B being the responsibilities as set forth on page 10 for the executive presbyter and the stated clerk. So the question that I'm having is, and I come from the business world, but if there are things that the current presbyters are responsible for and are doing or not doing that the presbytery feels is important for them to do, are they outlined in these responsibilities on page 10? And if not, they certainly should be. Thank you.
Come on forward.
Hi, I'm Catherine Todd, teaching elder at member at large. I understand when we're in places of change that there's a lot of anxiety, and I see that in myself. And I feel that in the room. And I also know the instinct to knee jerk go back to what we had before. And what I'm reading is a return to what we had before. And in my experience, it did not work. And I understand we are separating out the presbyter from the stated clerk, and I applaud that. Because when we had a conglomerate of one person with all the power, we got lazy. I watched for the last 17 years before this transition began, how we were so dependent. We just simply made a call. What do I do? We didn't even check the book of order. We made the call and whatever was said was done. If we had a budget question, whatever was said was done. I worked alongside Carson, who was in the role, as a colleague. I was a member of Presbytery staff when I was at Camp Hanover as the assistant director. And then as a minister in the presbytery and a presbyter, I see us knee jerking back to what was before. I don't think that's the way forward. I do think we have an amazing resource of people. My main concern is that we retain what I want to see is not a hierarchical thing. We did not have that vision. We had a vision for collaboration and support of the members of Presbytery. What I see is a return to rules that have to be followed, and here are our staff people to make sure we follow the rules and to resource us on the rules. I think there's a very sad existence of church, and it has become that for a lot of small churches and ministers. We spend all of our time doing paperwork and filling out forms and making sure that this is recorded here and then. And I get that, but it's not ministry. And the presbyters cannot do their work to lead us if we aren't showing up and doing our job. They can't do their work if we're making them just do all the busy stuff. So maybe we do need more staff to support, but I don't want to lose the vision, what we're heading toward, to find something collaborative, because we have a whole new world we're working in. The church is not the same. We've got to do it differently and not go back.
Thank you. Come forward, Reverend Adams.
Sam Adams, teaching elder, Union Presbyterian Seminary. I'm going to be very brief. I know time's short. Wanted to thank the task force for all of your hard work. As is my wont to do, I want to bring us to scripture for just a moment and talk about the fact that the call for compassion, for creativity, for the freedom of the Holy Spirit to work recurs throughout both testaments, as does the need for careful financial stewardship in both testaments, and that you can't expend your resources quickly and in a reckless way. So I salute the task force for your hard work in trying to navigate that. But my question is about process going forward. It seems very clear to me, and I assume that you knew this was happening and would happen in this meeting, that we need some scaffolding going forward between now and the next stated meeting, such that there can be input, careful trying to rebuild trust, and just some mechanisms through which we as members of the presbytery can continue to give the task force input. And what are your thoughts about how we might do that going forward? Because clearly this meeting is not going to be sufficient in order for there to be dialogue between us and the task force. So how is that? I mean, I think we should talk about that before we break today.
Thank you, Sam. They want to respond.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. That's a good, a great point. And I don't know if we immediately have an answer for what that looks like. We're open to what you all think looks like for that collection and how to do that. Just to speak briefly, I know there's been a couple questions, and then we do feel like, given the time, we need to move to the financial piece, and there may be some overlap that may touch back on what's been discussed, and I think that seems fair. But just to speak briefly, as we were looking objectively at the positions, we did speak a lot about the desire to want to move forward, not to go back to old models. That did come up a lot. The descriptions here are adapted loosely from previous the current job positions, and again, just using them as recommendations in basic places to start from. We did not see them as a system that's installing rules. We sensed, to a comment that came up earlier, the feeling of burden of the outdated policies and the work of catch up. We just heard a lot that sounded like stated clerk related roles to give them more capacity to handle that type of policy work in order to free us up as a presbytery to do the work that's before us. So I think in looking at a possible different model, that's where that came from. And then a clerk or someone who can do the or I'm sorry, a presbyter who can do the continued engagement work of connecting us from feeling disengaged and supporting us, which again was something we really felt. And just lastly, I know I do, and I think our team, again, we take the heart for how to engage compassion on this. We tried to put it in there. We know it can be in more. We are grateful for the work of our presbyters. We know they've been doing a lot, and we want to continue to be mindful of that about how we're approaching it. So just to speak to those last ones, I don't know if we want to move on. Shelley will help transition to the last one. Yeah, go ahead.
We have a couple. Well,
Just about the communication, I'd love for us to find a way. I know that we have probably peeved some of our colleagues when we haven't individually answered your questions or gone to groups because we want to have open, transparent communication. So we didn't want to be talking to one or two people or small groups of people. So if we can find a way to do it so that it is open and transparent what is being asked and said and responded to. So I'll also apologize. I know people have reached out, but we've tried not to have side conversations.
and please forgive me for asking this, but haven't you already spoken to this? Or was
I've
that-
not asked any questions about the recommendations.
Okay, it was on the overall piece.
It was
Oh,
on the
I
overall.
apologize. Just
Yes.
wanted to check. Thank
Sure.
you.
And I'll be very brief. If the task force recommendations are approved, what is the timeline for their implementation? Are positions eliminated as of the day after approval, or is there some transition period?
If there is no timeline put in, then clearly be from the moment of the Presbyterian adoption. So you're right, there needs to be some kind of a start date kind of thing in there.
Okay.
That's a good clarification.
If the existing presbyter positions are eliminated, is there any period during which the affected individuals will be precluded from working in the presbytery or with congregations of the presbytery, similar to the exclusion that applies to a retiring pastor at a church in the presbytery?
That would be an issue that has to be worked out. Yeah.
I think it's critical that
Yeah.
you think about that before we eliminate positions.
Right.
And obviously, you also need to give thought to matching severance, if there is to be a severance package, to any exclusionary period that might be imposed. And then finally, I have one question about the recommendations and what was noted before, that the report of the task force acknowledges that the new model that you've proposed really doesn't save any money. And my understanding is that finance has looked at that, and this is third hand, so if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but that finance has looked at that and has confirmed that the new model doesn't save any money.
Well,
So
it does save money. It does not solve our deficit problem.
does it save enough to matter?
It's a start. It's a start.
Okay, thank you.
And then I'm going to say that's the last one, and we're going to start speaking, and we're going to start talking about the rest of the issues. But go ahead.
Sarah Schutte, teaching elder, Milford Presbyterian Church. I also serve on the Commission on Ministry and as chair of the examination committee. And so I'm working firsthand with staff and seeing the current issues. And as my colleague, Kellyanne, co-moderator of COM, spoke to, and has been identified in the report and in our conversation tonight, it is the time of transition. There has been upheaval. There's been a need for new policies and a lot of different things. At the same time, with Franklin retiring and then not being able to continue on part-time and all those other pieces, there's not been the same administrative support. And I think from our perspective, Kellyanne and I on COM, we are already having trouble finding ruling elders to serve on COM. And because of that and our need for parity, while we have 25 spots open, we currently have 14 members. So all of us are bearing too much of a burden as far as liaison churches and just the work, the heavy work that there is. Our concern is it is a lot and that we will lose further leadership from teaching elders as well if we don't have direct and specific administrative support to not only undergird the work of the presbyters, but also the work of the committees. So I'd like to bring that forth for consideration and to say, yes, we as members of the presbytery need to be doing more, but the people that are in the roles now need more support because we also have full-time jobs and other things we have to do. This is part of our work. Following up on the comments just before me, thinking about if this were to be implemented, what does the next transition look like? Feeling that need of, we need leadership. And now if it's taken away, how will that void be filled? What are the plans for the next transition after that?
Thank you, Reverend Schutte. You all like? In 8 whole minutes.
8 whole minutes. We're gonna talk about money.
I guess it's 10 minutes. My watch is running fast.
While Gordon is coming up, I will turn us to the next part of our report, which is the task number 2 and 3, and just I want to ground us where we were in November of 2023 and remind us that we were talking about budget deficits, draws on an endowment that implied that we would then draw it down to nothing. And so that is where that anxiety, which has already been mentioned, is what brought forth the task force. And in that budget conversation, there were key ministries we've discussed here, new worshiping communities and otherwise that were cut. So we are at another friction point, which is that of funding. And so that was something we looked at. We did our best to look at funds and make those recommendations. And then Gordon, do you want to say anything else?
Gordon Mapes, teaching elder Chester again, and a member of Commission on Ministry, as is Shelley as well. I think her point about a critical point again continues. It's not new. It's been here for a while. I think post-COVID, I think the comments earlier about the church in the last 20, 30 years all play into and were part of our various conversations. We are at a point where we began back in November, December with this concern on the draw of our endowments and restricted funds, and were those sustainable? We did come to the point that we need more time to consider, is it appropriate to save that cookie jar forever, or is it appropriate to spend it down immediately? We did not address that. We think that is a larger conversation for the presbytery to engage in about that before we can go forward one way or the other. But we did think about a more conservative drawdown that's based on nonprofit strategy, which is in the report. The other piece that we came to this at the beginning was conversation about a per capita. And so there was research done on per capita and what they are, because the Presbytery of the James has not had a per capita ever in our existence. So research was done. Part of that you see in your findings, that a mission funding task force of the General Assembly made a preliminary report last month. And part of that said per capita funding is not going to be sustainable in the future. And so we came to a recommendation that said, yeah, I'll go look at it. But our finding says we don't see that as wise for the Presbytery of the James, given our history of not having them,
given the current funding contributions of our various churches, which are in many ways exceed what, and we thought about a small per capita, not one that would completely cover our administrative hole, but something to ease into it over a few years. And even a small one would probably be met. And we were thinking $30 for the presbytery would meet great resistance from our congregations. So we ended up saying it's not wise to think about a per capita addition to our funding. So we stay on this shaky sustainability ground of our finances. And so we made those recommendations. The other piece we did put in there was there has been consideration for some years, but never acted upon, of selling our current office structure. And what could we do with that? Well, as we know, a recent action has made a former church closed and made that location available. It could be a mission site for Presbytery Mission. It could be a meeting site. It's got lots of good stuff there. Looking at the monies, our current office is $11,000 for utilities, $11,000 annually for grounds, and some portion, Cindy was not able to parse out what portion of the $26,000 for insurance goes to the actual building. There are other pieces in there, but some number around 30 to 35,000 probably would be saved by selling that, plus whatever money is received, and then could be invested in one of our restricted funds and saved for mission work or some other project. So that's kind of where we were. Questions?
Yes, I have a hand raised. Reverend Lane, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Patrick Lane, Minister Member, Mitchell's Presbyterian Church. I just have a question on the task force recommendation number 2 on page 13 about the selling of the current office. First off, fully in favor of selling the current office building. My question is about the use of Mechanicsville's church. Was there a cost analysis done on what it would look like to rent a space either from Union, perhaps from the Synod, or perhaps partnering with Hanover Camp to have a facility at the campsite? That's my question. Thank you.
There was no study done on those questions. Save that for the next steps.
Then I would like to request that the task force take that under consideration moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Reverend Foster?
Yeah. Reverend Carrie Foster, Amelia Presbyterian Church, actually the chair of the Budget and Finance Committee as well. If I'm on the right page, on page 12, when you looked at item number 3, the recommend authorized users of church ministries, those funds you have listed there, in your research or how you approach that, did you come across any really cool findings, like is some of it restricted, some isn't? This came about because of that. In other words, the question becomes to me whether or not these funds are accessible, or whether or not Presbytery put previous demands upon that the body voted on, which means the second body could vote to change those. In other words, my question is, how fluid are these accounts?
Carrie, we looked predominantly at the, I need to read this because Church Ministries and Development Fund and the Genesis and Generations Funds. We did not look at that list of all others. There is an unresearched opinion by a former trustee of this presbytery that the majority of those are extremely restricted, and that we would have to go through many conversations and much research to use those for other purposes than what are stated. But we did not go into all of that. We only looked at those 2, which had been changed during the pandemic by the Presbytery action. But there still seems to be uncertainty and confusion about that change, which brought forth the recommendation to publish this information in a easily accessible form, like on the website.
So to put words into your mouth, what you're saying is that the Presbytery really does have access to determine the use of these funds by actions of the entire body. Is that your assumption, or is that close to being valid?
I'm not going to go that far, given my shaky financial knowledge and my great trust in the wealth of treasures that I have found along the way in my churches and in my presbytery. But I would start that conversation with Cindy probably, and then expand out.
Thank you.
We have nobody on Zoom, so come forward. Thank you. And we are really we have 1 minute.
Reverend Susan Steinberg, teaching elder at Gum Spring, Providence Gum Spring. Have you had a chance to do any kind of detailed analysis of the financial implications of the current model of the administration of the presbytery versus the proposed model of moving and new staffing? Any kind of detailed financial and comparison?
I can tell you the Mission Council received an analysis from our accounting staff that looked at the comparison of the new model to our current expenses. In other words, with a vacant presbyter position, and looked at the relative expenses of the new one versus that one. And we received that at our last Mission Council meeting. I can't, I know of no other deep dive into it. And I don't think they did a deep dive either.
So that would be forthcoming.
Oh, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Dan Jordan, a ruling elder at Susan's Church. Moderator, 2 quick points. One, there's an administrative commission for the Mechanicsville Church that is up and running. We are collecting information. We've engaged an appraiser. We've asked a number of contractors to provide us information for costs to do repairs of that building. So long as there are no objections on within the administrative commission, we will share that information with the task force. So to the extent it might be useful or helpful in your assessment of the property. Second.
Oh, can I interrupt and say Dan is also chairman of the Board of Trustees? Just mention that.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Not to be didactic, the Presbytery has 2 very small endowments, and they are not relevant to our discussion. All of the other funds are either restricted or unrestricted funds. I would ask the task force not to use the term endowment in a revised report because that has accounting implications that I don't think are relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. We have reached 7:30, ladies and gentlemen. I am ready to close us. I thank you for your patience with each other and especially with me because I haven't done everything perfectly that I wished I would have as we navigated this difficult subject matter. Once again, let me thank our hosts here at First Presbyterian Church. And all the volunteers who made all this possible. I also want to thank Ashland Presbytery and King's Chapel. Ashland Presbyterian and King's Chapel for our refreshments this evening. That was very nice of them to bring them down to us. Having completed our agreed upon business, I declare that the July 30th special meeting of the Presbytery of the James is adjourned, and I ask you to join in prayer.
Let us pray. God, we thank you for sending the Holy Spirit to be with us tonight. We thank you for your faithfulness and your steadfast love. We pray for your blessings, grace, and peace to be upon us as we leave this place. This we pray in the name of your Son and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.